The wildfire started like any other, a lightning strike, a spark in the bone-dry brushlands, and suddenly half the forest was ablaze. Firefighter Ben Carter stood at the edge of the towering inferno, sweat dripping down his back despite the thick protective gear. The fire roared like a living beast, devouring everything in its path. "Move it, Carter!" his captain barked. "We need a containment line now." Ben nodded, gripping his gear tightly, but something gnawed at him, an eerie sense of recognition. As he stared into the flames, his breath hitched. For a split second, he swore he saw a face staring back at him. It wasn't just any face. It was Eric. Eric, who had died in a house fire 5 years ago. Eric, whose funeral Ben had attended with heavy guilt sitting in his chest. The face flickered within the embers, mouth moving as if whispering something. Then it was gone. Ben swallowed hard, shaking off the unease. "Just my mind playing tricks," he muttered to himself. But deep down, something in his gut told him otherwise. The fire spread faster than expected. The crew had been battling it for over 48 hours with little rest. They moved deeper into the forest, cutting fire breaks and pushing back the flames. Ben kept seeing things. First it was Eric, then it was his father, who died in a freak accident on duty when Ben was just a kid. His old mentor, Captain Dawes, who'd lost his life saving others in a building collapse. All of them, their faces shimmering in the fire, staring at him, whispering, "Ben!" Every time he blinked, they were gone, but their burned-in stares lingered in his mind. His partner, Manny, noticed something was off. "You good, man? You look like you've seen a ghost." Ben forced a chuckle. "Just the heat messing with me." But he knew better. Later that night, they set up camp near the fire line. The night air was thick with smoke, the distant glow of flames making the trees look like skeletons in the darkness. Lying on his back, staring at the flickering orange sky, Ben couldn't sleep. His radio crackled, static. Then a voice. "Ben, get out!" He bolted upright, grabbing the radio. "Who's there?" Static. Manny stirred beside him. "What's up?" Ben hesitated. "Thought I heard something." Manny groaned and turned over. "You're freaking yourself out, dude." Ben stared out into the woods. He could see faint embers glowing in the distance, almost too evenly spaced, like eyes, watching. By morning, the fire had taken a turn for the worse. The wind shifted, trapping their crew in a narrow valley. The fire seemed to move with purpose, cutting off escape routes like a predator closing in on its prey. The ground beneath Ben's boots crackled and smoked. The air shimmered with unbearable heat, but above the flames, he saw them again, faces forming in the smoke, hollow and watching. And this time, they weren't whispering. They were screaming. Jake, another firefighter, grabbed his arm. "Ben, we need to move, now!" But Ben couldn't take his eyes off the faces. They were moving, merging into one, their mouths stretched open in silent agony. Then he realized something horrifying. The fire wasn't random. It was following him. Ben and the crew pushed forward, trying to find an escape route, but the fire twisted unnaturally, blocking their way at every turn. It was no longer just a force of nature. It was alive. "Captain, the fire's cutting us off everywhere we go," Manny shouted. Ben looked at the burn patterns on the ground, his heart stopping. They weren't random scorch marks. They formed a name. His name. Panicked, they made their way to an abandoned fire watchtower, hoping for shelter. Inside, the charred walls reeked of old smoke, and the air was thick with tension. Ben found an old logbook on the desk, covered in ash. He flipped through the pages, his hands trembling. His own name was written inside, again and again, on different dates. "Get out," a voice whispered behind him. He spun around, and there, standing in the doorway, was Eric, or what was left of him. Charred flesh, blackened skin, empty eyes. Ben staggered back. "You're not real." Eric's burned lips curled into something that could barely be called a smile. "Neither is this fire." The fire suddenly surged toward the tower, engulfing it in seconds. "Go! Move!" Captain Ramirez shouted, dragging Ben away from the apparition. They barely escaped, running for their lives as the fire raged with an intensity that defied all logic. As they reached the safety of a fire break, Ben turned back and saw the watchtower crumble into ashes. And in the rising smoke, Eric's face stared back, this time smiling. Days later, after the fire was contained, investigators combed through the remnants. They found something they couldn't explain: Ben's childhood firefighter badge buried in the ashes of the watchtower, miles from where it should have been. No one believed him when he said he'd never been here before. But Ben knew the truth. Some fires weren't natural, some fires never truly went out. Back at the station, Ben tried to move on, but the nightmares didn't stop. Neither did the whispers. One night, he was sitting alone in the locker room when the smell of smoke filled the air. His radio crackled to life. "Ben, get out!" He looked up at the mirror across the room and froze. Behind him, in the reflection, stood Eric, smiling that same burned, hollow smile. The lights flickered, and when they went out completely, Ben heard the fire's final whisper. "It's your turn."